And that's actually a big way that people give power away, is to think that it's your responsibility to save someone, and it's actually it's counterintuitive, because if you actually want to support someone, the best way you can do that is to allow them space to make their own choice, to make their own decision, to take responsibility for themselves.
A question asked courageously, answered honestly, and lived authentically can change your whole life. For me, that question was, how can I use what I have, what I love, and what I know to bless the lives of others? The School for Good Living and this podcast are one answer to that question. Hi, I'm Brian Miller. I know that the world can work for everyone, but that it won't until it works for you. I've created this to help you make the difference you were born to make. It's a series of conversations with thought leaders who are moving humanity forward. And in each episode, I explore their lives and the work they do. I also ask them to break down how they've gotten their books written, published, and read. This podcast is all about exploring the magic and mystery, and sometimes the misery, of the creative process. So if you have a mission, a message, and the motivation to share it, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the School for Good Living. Today, my guest is Sydney Campos, author of the Empath Experience, What to Do When You Feel Everything. I'm going to read from Sydney's bio here for just a moment. Sydney is an alignment alchemist, spiritual teacher, author, and speaker. She activates visionary leaders to live in alignment with their soul purpose while embodying next-level power, pleasure, and prosperity. Sydney is fiercely committed to awakening consciousness across the planet and creating new paradigms of economy, creativity, spirituality, and intimacy. I could go on and tell you about all of the certifications and programs that Sydney has completed, but you can read more about those yourself on sydneycampos.com. Let me just say that part of what drew me to her, part of why I wanted to interview her, is that she is someone who loves to learn, who loves to share. That's very evident. And specifically, what Sydney talks about in this book is what it's like to be an empath, what it's like to be someone who actually feels other people's feelings, and perhaps even the feelings of other living things, including animals, perhaps plants, perhaps even the planet itself. She describes in this interview and in her book an awakening of sorts she had when she didn't realize that that was who she was, or a gift or ability she had. And that's why for about a decade, she dealt with drugs and alcohol and other self-destructive behaviors as a way of coping with the intensity of emotion that she felt from those around her. So we talk about this in the interview. We talk about the dynamics of money, sex, and power. We talk about in fact, I'm not going to tell you what this was because I want you to listen to it from Sydney's words, but I ask her to share if we find ourselves in that situation of addiction or powerlessness over any substance or activity, what we could or maybe should do in such a moment. I also ask her to share if we love someone who's on such a destructive path, what can we do in that situation? How can we support and love those that we care for who aren't maybe doing what's in their own best interest? We also explore a distinction that I thought was really insightful that Sydney makes about the difference between service and servitude and why that matters. And then we get into, after the enlightening lightning round, we talk about Sydney's experience writing a book, which I found to be really miraculous. If you want to have written a book, if you aspire to write a book, I'm not sure how much Sydney's experience is going to help you because it was pretty unique from many of my guests, but I think you'll take away some inspiration and perhaps some useful ideas when it comes to promotion. Sydney's new book, The Consciousness Code, is set to come out in fall of 2020, and she shares the things that she would have done differently when it comes to marketing and promoting the Empath Experience, many of which could benefit you, again, if that's something you want to do. So I think you'll take away something from this interview that makes you a better person, I believe. So with that, I hope you enjoy this interview with Sydney Campos. Sid, welcome to the School for Good Living.
Thank you. It's really beautiful to be with you.
Will you tell me, please, what is life about?
I love this question. Life is about being your true self and having a great time. And being of service, helping other people to do the same.
Yeah, I think so. You know, as I was preparing for this discussion and reading your book, The Empath Experience, What to Do When You Feel Everything, There was a lot of it. There was a lot in your book that really resonated with my own personal journey. And it made me think about this thing I've heard said before about many of us live two lives. We live a life full of pain and regret and, remorse, this kind of thing. And then we live the life where we express and live the lessons we learned from the first life. And I so I want to jump into that. And I know I didn't ask you about this before we started recording, but I hope you don't mind if I ask you some personal questions that come out of things I read in your book. Is that okay with you?
I'm a totally open book. Try me.
Okay. So tell me about your arrest.
Which one?
There were multiple? How many?
There's a lot. I have a record.
Holy cow. Okay.
So, I mean, I don't mean to say that in like a bragging way. Yeah. Like, it's funny. I don't think about it often. This happened a long time ago. But for example, like a year ago, I was going to get my global entry, like TSA card. And, and I go to the airport at LAX at the time, and they're like, they flagged me as, they're like, we're not sure if we're going to be able to give you the flight clearance because of your arrest record. And I hadn't thought about it in years, and I'm like, what? That's so weird. Like, this is, but I felt shame and I felt embarrassment in that moment because it really caught me by surprise. And, and those arrests were, a long time ago, in my probably between the ages of like 18, 19, 20. There were some when I was younger too. Those aren't on my record, but they were all involving drinking, getting arrested for being drunk in public, being a danger to myself and others. And, and just being, and I'm actually really grateful for a lot of the times I got intercepted. I was in danger. I was like blacked out drunk and could have walked into traffic. I mean, I'm grateful for those officers that took me in so I could, be in a safe, contained place.
Yeah. Sometimes I marvel that any of us make it to adulthood, honestly, between all the hazards of being a child and, all the other crime and accident and disease that can befall us. But I definitely wondered when I read that, because in the book, I didn't see you expand on arrest. And I know there's always a story behind that. And I wondered a bit, is this one of those well-behaved women rarely make history kind of arrests where you're an activist, or was it, something else? But let me go to that for a minute then about the alcohol, because in your book, you talk about drinking as a way of muting your feelings for many years, right? Because, and I'd love to hear you talk more about this, but for a long time, you didn't recognize that you were an empath. And then as listeners, okay, so now we're like 2 levels deep, but maybe we actually start there. Like, what is an empath, first of all?
An empath is, in the very simplest context, someone that can feel what others are feeling and can even feel it, feel other emotions or energetic expressions, really any other living being, not just people. There's many different kinds of empaths, and I go into that a little bit in my book, and there's many different expressions. And yet, in the simplest term, a lot of people that are awakening to their empathic sensitivity may feel that they can always really feel deeply like what other people are feeling, not only emotionally, but also maybe even physically. They can feel physical pain in other people's bodies, almost to the extent that it feels like pain in their own body. And it can create a lot of confusion if you don't know that, this is what you're tuning into. There can be a lot of disassociation from oneself. It's like, is that my feeling? Is that my pain? Or is this someone else's? Or maybe usually at the beginning, you just think it's all you.
Yeah. I find this subject so fascinating because I think our culture really has a very limited vocabulary and understanding of emotion, things of an emotional nature, emotions, feelings. It's about as deep as a lot of people's, understanding seems to go, because it's not something that we're taught, many of us, by our parents or in school, but it's one of the most important things in life, right? So this idea, as I've kind of learned principles of coaching and personal leadership over about the last 10 years. It looks like you and I have kind of a similar timeline in that, although, and I want to ask some of your learning as well. But where I'm trying to go with this is this idea that I've kind of come to a place of where I'm kind of skeptical about empathic abilities, only because I don't think I understand it yet. So what I'm hearing and what you're saying is that the idea of an empath is that an empath is someone who has the ability to feel another's feelings as that person feels them. Or another living thing, even potentially animals, plants, you mentioned in the book, even the planet. There's earth empaths, this kind of thing. And so I don't it's not that I totally dismiss it, but I think maybe I don't fully understand it. But do you think that's true, that people can actually feel another person's emotions, not just in the way of like mirror neurons or like, oh, I've been sad too, but like actually feeling the very same sadness that another is feeling or the joy that another is feeling?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually my definition and understanding has shifted a lot since I've written the book. I've, evolved so much since then. And now my understanding and what I believe is more that, all human beings have the capacity to be highly, not only empathic, but teleempathic, so that we're actually like very telepathically oriented and we're all highly intuitive. And, I hold very much more now this like multidimensional knowing of like divine humans being like these pure energetic beings with many, many expressions of intuition, like far beyond the few terms that we have made up
Sure.
over the last little while. But yet, to your point, there's a distinction that I write about in the earlier part of my book, actually, that's really helpful. And it's the distinction between empathy and being an empath.
Okay.
Empathy is just like what you said. Empathy is like, oh, like someone tells you their dog died, right? And you're like, oh, I'm so sorry. I could feel how sad you must be. Like that's, we agree that that's a loss and there's grief and sadness. And I empathize with that. And I might even feel a little bit of like, yeah, that's sad. But then I'll, 10 minutes later, whenever the conversation's over, I'll leave and go on, that person will leave and go on to the next thing. They're not like continuing to feel really sad about this loss of the dog that wasn't even theirs. Like they had experienced the loss of a loved one themselves.
Yeah.
Now, an empath, usually, an empath that's also not yet identified as that, would go into the same conversation and not only feel empathy, but also like might even feel the sadness of the person that's lost the dog or the loved one, might even like really feel such a deep sense of grief and loss, maybe even more so than the person communicating to them is feeling. Like the empath might actually be able to feel like what's underneath, and then might even take that energy on with them after the conversation's over, might still feel like a latent sense of sadness and grief or depletion and might not have a rational explanation for that, but there's still that energy there present if they've really absorbed it from that context.
Yeah, and I can imagine, as you talk about in the book, that could be very, not just confusing, but very difficult if you weren't aware that you were one of these people. If you were an empath, that you had this tendency or ability to take on and feel other people's energy. And so it's, in a way, I think, as I was reading, I thought about that, the thing I learned about early childhood development, where when a baby's born, it doesn't actually even know it's separate from its mother for a while, right? And so in this way, energetically, that we don't even necessarily know where we begin and end when it comes to other people, and how that could be very distressing, very disorienting, very confusing. And so maybe now this brings us back to the point we were just talking about a moment ago with your use of alcohol. Before you realized, before you had this awareness that you're one of these people, will you talk about what it was like when you realized that you were an empath, or maybe what life was like before, and then what life's been like now that you are aware of that?
Yeah, I also want to share, and maybe this is a funny roundabout way of answering your question. Like, I'm really sensitive to, using these terms to self-identify as a way to create separation. Like, I'm an empath.
Oh, yeah.
I'm different.
Yeah.
I'm special.
Yeah.
I'm better. Like, whatever, all the ways that we're all clamoring for identity, instead of just being who we are. And so I feel sensitive to that because, and that's just part of my evolution over the last little while. Like, I wrote this book over 2 years ago, and I feel like such a different, my voice is different. The way I see things is much different. And so I always say that whenever I'm sharing about the book, like, that was take it or leave it. And I have some different ideas now, like, especially if I'm being interviewed about it. But, because, at the end of the day, to your point, like, we didn't know we're separate from our mother.
Right.
Who says we're separate from each other? Who says you're not a reflection of me? Who says that I didn't actually create you from my consciousness to help me to better understand myself? These are some of the things I like to play with and notice in our lives, the constellation of mirrors that tend to show up, reflecting to us certain dynamics that we're ready to heal or grow through or, finally integrate. And so, but, obviously, many years ago when I was younger and really getting activated in my psychic awareness and, intuitive sensitivity, I didn't know what to do. I felt like something was wrong with me. I actually felt like I was crazy. Like the way that I experienced life was there's something wrong with me because I didn't see other people feeling so sensitive, and taking things so personally
Mhm.
and also just carrying this weight of the world on my shoulders. Like I didn't understand why everyone else seemed okay when meanwhile there's like homeless people on the street and war and people dying and not taking care of the planet, not taking care of each other. How is everybody okay with this? Like I really felt deep loneliness and confusion. And and then I had to be a kid and go to school and be social and do all this life stuff, and it always just felt extra difficult because I was seeing life through this lens of you know great detail, like really paying attention to people, paying attention to what they were feeling. And I didn't know this at the time,
Right.
but I was really tuning in with everybody. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? How are we all orienting around each other? Like, I have a very deep capacity for insight and reflection, and I've always had that. But I didn't know that not everyone else around me was operating in that way. So I felt very isolated from most of my peers for much of my life because I just felt like I couldn't really communicate. Like my experience of the world was like very different. And I didn't have the words to even describe that. I didn't know that no one else was, anyways. So we're getting a little existential now. So
But
around the
by the
age of,
way, sorry, just to jump in for a minute, I think
yeah,
I said, I mean, I know a lot of people seem to feel that way, right? Either
yeah.
isolated, and many people, I can't. I've stopped being surprised in my role as a coach at
Mm,
how many people feel like there's something wrong with them, they're somehow
mhm.
deficient, they're inadequate, or something like this, or that other people just don't get them. And so that experience, both from my own personal experience and then from people I work with, I know, in some ways is universal, but I also acknowledge every one of us is unique and individual as well.
It is really universal.
Yeah.
And the things that we're, ashamed of and that we hide tend to be the things that we actually are most connected to others
Yeah.
through, that they're the things we share with everybody else. Actually, it's funny. It's like the paradox. Everyone's like hiding the thing that we all actually have most in common.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was 14 years old. I started drinking and it was like the best thing I ever found in my life. It was such a relief. I was like, oh my God, this feeling, what alcohol did to my body at that time was just like a relief. It's like,
Well,
oh my God, I can just relax. I can
mm,
just breathe. I don't have to be thinking about what everyone else is thinking. I don't have to be, and again, I wasn't aware of what I'm telling you now at that time, but
right.
I just felt like, oh my God, I can relax.
And then, I mean, 14, that's young. And how long, and I understand now that you don't drink. Is that right?
I just celebrated 8 years
Wow.
clean from drugs and alcohol in November. Yeah,
Congratulations.
thanks.
Yeah, good for you. I myself don't drink either. And, I know we all have different motives for what we do. And for me, there's not a morality behind it. It's really just, first of all, I realize I'm less of an a-hole when I don't drink,
Yeah.
but also the own awareness, like being able to
Mm,
hear my own inner voice, to achieve a state
mhm,
of peace and equanimity more easily. Like that's all part of it for me. But tell me about that 8-year window there from 14 to
mhm,
22. And you touched on some of these arrests. Like,
mhm.
I guess maybe the thing I'm really most interested in is how and why did you come out of it?
Yeah, it feels like such a long, it was 10 years actually. I got sober when I was 24. I went to my first AA meeting when I was 17 because already after 3 years of drinking, I was, getting into a lot of trouble and putting myself in a lot of danger. What really triggered me into that initial awareness that I might have a problem was, when one of my best friends told me that she couldn't be around me anymore because of the way I was, when I was drinking. She was really scared and worried about me, and it couldn't, I'd be going into full on blackouts, having conversations, getting into fights that I wouldn't remember. And then I'd call my friends the next day, like, what happened? Is everything, And it was just over and over and over again. And, and I went to a meeting thinking that like maybe I was really suffering a lot, didn't really know what else to do. But I went there and I didn't really see anything for me there. I was like, well, all these people are old and, clearly I'm okay. And I'm going to go to college and I'm going to have fun and I'm going to keep drinking. And I just wasn't ready yet. But at the same time, I like had my heart totally broken because here was my best friend that could no longer be around me. So I experienced a deep loss of like, it almost felt like a breakup, it was like a true love, like such a deep love. And I got to see how I was the only one that was, keeping that from myself. And that was incredibly painful. And the journey of drinking for me and alcoholism, drug abuse is like that. It's like this isolation and this self-flagellating abuse of like keeping from yourself the things that you want most. And it's like there's so many paradoxes within, but it was just, it's really painful. And it was more things like that over the years, including physical, injuries, lots of near-death experiences, more arrests, more humiliation, a lot of codependent relationships, a lot of things, in addition to like having a double life of doing really well in school and being involved in all these activist organizations and being a visionary, committed to, studying and supporting organizations, in the realms of education and diversity and equal access, and had a really good heart, when it came to serving others and looking like I really cared about serving the world. But when it came to taking care of myself, I had no capacity and I didn't know what to do. And so, yeah, the end of it all happened over about a year. I moved to New York City in 2010 and basically just had all of my worst fears come true. I was like running out of money. My student loans were kicking in. I was just really, really in this whole new environment. It was like the big city. And on one hand, it's like what I'd always dreamed of. I could like finally, I'm here, I've arrived. On the other hand, it's like, can I do this? Do I know what I'm doing? Like, this is really intense. Like, long story short, started, instead of going into like a career that I thought I was moving there for, instead got into the club scene, was a club promoter. That led me to more, kind of vampiric lifestyle tendencies and a lot more drugs. I was doing a lot of cocaine, drinking heavily often, associating with, people that didn't necessarily have my best interests in mind. And also at that time got involved in escorting and stripping and things like that, and just exploring shadow sexuality, but also wrapped up a lot in this, like chasing money, and really a lot of different dynamics there. I could talk about that for hours, all the lessons of like wanting to be paid to be myself and the healing of actually being there and being able to be free and be sexually expressed and be appreciated and feel beautiful, and so many dynamics, but all fueled by drugs and alcohol,
Wow.
So never really fully present.
And on that point, I understand that you actually have a program or a course right now around this. Is that right? Something around like what you're talking about?
Yeah, Kevin and we actually created a course everything I've created, all of my courses touch on the energetics of money, sex, and power, because those have tended to be the gateways to, the core wounds and shadows that
Totally.
I transmute in this life.
Yeah.
So, but Kevin and I created a course called Mastering Magnetism, all about money, sex, and power, and becoming a clear channel to be truly magnetic and to make the unconscious conscious and really, take responsibility for creating the life that you really want. And yeah, so basically I got, what woke me up was a series of wake up calls over the last 6 months of a really challenging period. A lot of really scary wake up calls. Like I'd be blacked out, on the subway after working at the strip club, and it would be like 4 a.m. or something. And I would be woken up by a police officer at the end of the L train in Far Rockaway, which is like a really dangerous part of New York City, because I passed out and I'm like the only person on the train. I mean, so many things could have happened to me. I'm very lucky to be alive.
Yeah.
And I'd be woken up by the police officer, and then I would, like, oh God, okay, wow. And then I'd go home, I'd go sleep for like 4 hours, and then I'd go to I had a full-time job at a financial services office, and I would work there from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I was just, I was like a shell of a human being. Like I really was. I was so I think I was possessed. I'm not sure how I was able to do that.
Wow.
Did that for a few months. And then eventually found myself in a therapist's office, and I thought I was going there for career counseling because I really thought like if I could just have some support and understanding, the job that I'm supposed to
Yeah.
do, then I can feel fulfilled. And then I don't have to behave in all these ways. This is literally the way that I was orienting in the world. And like, it's an outside thing. If I could just make the outside picture look clear and make sense, then maybe I don't have to behave in these other ways. I don't have to suffer. I don't have to feel so confused or worried. And then eventually I told this therapist the truth of what I had been actually doing, which is actually more than I just told you. There were many other things going on that were really crazy
Those
and
are
dangerous.
podcast interview parts 4, 5, and 6.
There's a lot of things. Things, and maybe I'll never tell. Who knows?
Yeah.
There's so much. There's so many things. And the therapist, though, after I told her, this is like the first time I told someone the truth.
Wow.
That's the most important takeaway of this whole thing. Is like I told someone the truth of all the things that up until then I had been hiding and keeping to myself with great shame.
Yeah.
Told her the truth, and the look on her face was like a total God shot. She was like, without saying anything, the look on her face was like, I see myself in the mirror right now. And it was like my soul screaming at me that, you're going to die if you keep doing this.
Wow.
You're going to die. What are you doing? And that was a major wake up call. And I didn't get cleaned up right away, but it was like something really shifted in me in that moment.
Wow.
And I got clean shortly thereafter, after a failed like one night stand, waking up, not knowing where I was. And that was also different though, because that was a familiar situation, waking up, not knowing where I was, one eye open. Am I in my house? I don't know. But at that point I woke up because my alarm on my phone went off, and the alarm was reminding me that I had a lunch date in Manhattan to go meet my family friend and her niece who was getting ready to go to college. They wanted to have lunch with me to talk about my experience in college because they saw me as this role model, as this example, because I had done really well in school. And I guess I was a role model. And so there was something about that contrast that like literally woke me up with the alarm, but like also woke me up to this feeling of, wait a minute, I think that like who those people expect me to show up as, that feels more true than what I'm doing right now, than who I'm being here. And again, I didn't have that awareness now, but in hindsight, I can see like that was my last day drinking and doing drugs. That was like sober day one, started the following day, and I went to AA a few days later. And yeah.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing what you did share. I suspect that this conversation by this point, I mean, we're 20 minutes or so in, has probably had one of two effects on listeners. One is, I think, probably many listeners are drawn in and they're recognizing some tendencies in themselves, even if they maybe didn't get, to a depth that you did about blackout drunk and things that were maybe very self-defeating or self-destructive, and others are not really recognizing themselves in it at all and maybe tuned out, which of course is fine. But I'm glad you said what you said about truth, because what I'd love to just touch on before we transition to some of the other questions I have for you is, for someone who's in this situation, and I'm interested to explore this also for someone who loves someone who's in this situation, which I know are different, both painful. And maybe truth is the answer. But what do you say to somebody who really recognizes aspects of themselves in those 10 years you just, articulated?
Well, the first thing that comes up is like alcohol and drugs are a symptom, like don't compare too much. Like when I talk about drugs and alcohol and you're like, oh, well, I didn't have a problem with that. It's totally different. It's like, those are literally just symptomatic expressions of, as we said, a very universal, I believe, experience of an like unquenchable loneliness and an unquenchable sense of like feeling that everything is up to me. I have to control everything. I have to save the world. I have to figure it all out. I have to be perfect.
Yeah, that's heavy.
Like feeling such a deep pressure to do it all right, to have it figured out. Like that was my experience, so I was so tightly wound up and I'm feeling everything and I'm like so tapped in. I'm feeling everybody. I have no words to describe that experience, but I'm just so wound up. I'm so uptight and I'm so in my head, over analyzing everything. And I still struggle with this sometimes, like, wow, I'm still growing in this way majorly. It's like deeper layers of the overanalysis, self-judgment, feeling like I have to have it figured out. This is like a continual thing. And it was so hard when I was younger because I had no way of expressing what I was feeling, but I was just so uptight. And so the drinking, the drugs was just like a way to relax. So I know that we all have these experiences of feeling like it's just too much and there's so much pressure and we just have to figure it out and people expect us to be perfect or we expect ourselves to be perfect. And then how do you check out? Like we all have different ways. So I just want to offer that because it's like, it's so important to identify with the feelings. And I'm actually conscious of talking too much about drugs or alcohol or my experience in sex work, for example, because that can be really isolating if people are just comparing the outsides.
Right.
Well, I didn't do that stuff, so we're different. But it's no, the feelings and the emotional experience, the trauma is quite universal. And there's deep, messages that we can all relate to in everyone's journey, actually, when we can set the identity and the externality aside and like really like sink into the felt experience. But to anybody that relates, to anything I've shared so far, the most powerful thing you can ever do is ask for help. Like get out of your own way and stop thinking that you have to figure it all out and look perfect before you even ask for help, right? As is the case with a lot of perfectionists and my kind of people. It's like you even want to look good when you're asking for help, and you don't even want to ask for help until you know exactly what to say in the right way, so that even the help is perfectly delivered. And it's just so there's a point to what I shared when I finally told someone the truth. I could see myself and I could feel that weight be lifted and I could start to receive support, which in that case was literally just someone holding presence. Like I received support in someone's loving presence, like not running away after what I told them, just being myself, being seen, just like releasing a little bit of energy I had been holding for a long time.
Yeah, that's powerful. And that's one of the things that I love so much about coaching. This idea of being a space holder, being a witness, for others, where I think, and I certainly have respect for therapy as a modality, but I know many times, at least my experience is therapy often is, oh, there's something wrong with you, we'll fix you. You're dysfunctional, we'll get you functional. Where I love, and it seems to me just from what I've read about you and the videos I've watched online from your book that you seem to have that come from as well, that there is a beauty and perfection innate in us already. And sometimes it's just a matter of letting it out or letting go of what holds it back, So to hear you talk about that, someone like a loving presence who can simply be there without giving advice necessarily, without offering solutions, that's power. That's powerful.
Presence is our power. It really is. And to be in that, to be yourself, to be truly present, it's literally just a deconditioning of everything that you've ever learned, that's taught you to not be yourself or to be caught up in overthinking, to be caught up in overdoing, to be caught up in comparison. It's like, what are all the masks, what are all the masks that we wear that just keep us from being right here and right now with each other, and being with ourselves fully. And this is like I'm devoted to cultivating presence. I'm like so a student of how we embody presence, because I'm telling you, I've been, even in the last couple of weeks, I've been in a big initiation of peeling away masks and layers that, I never knew existed. I thought I was doing great and I am doing great. Yeah. And there's this like, really, I'm in like a deep sense of like humility right now for how many layers we all hold, know?
Is this a little bit like when you look back on your junior high or your high school hairstyles, your outfits? Like, did I really wear that? Was that really my mask? Yeah.
Oh my God, yes.
Well, okay. So before we totally transition away, I do want to ask for your perspective on this as well. If someone loves someone who they perceive is going through what I would say a struggle, whatever it is and whatever their thing is, whether it's drugs and alcohol or, destructive relationships or work or, for me, it was ridiculous amounts of video games, So I hear what you're saying, that we all have ways of doing it. People, it's food, right? Some people it's gambling, some people it's porn, it's other stuff, just being busy. But for anybody who sees somebody that they love going down what they see as a very destructive path, what do you offer to that person who's witnessing this occur?
Hmm. To those beautiful beings, I just offer you a lot of compassion and a lot of love, because I know how hard that feels to watch people that you love, who you see their genius, you see what they're capable of, you see how amazing they are, you love them so much, and you see them like in self-destruction. I mean, there's maybe no worse feeling actually. It's like, oh, yeah, what's the can you actually like really get humble and realize that the best thing that you can probably do in service to anyone else, especially your loved ones that are suffering, is to take care of yourself.
Wow. Why do you,
Is to like,
that seems
yeah.
so, I mean, I love that answer. And I actually I want to ask you more about that, because you talk about this, especially for empaths, treating yourself,
Yes.
like the most important in your life, which many people don't. But I'm
Mhm.
seeing this as kind of maybe a segue or transition. But what do you mean when you say that? Because it seems so counterintuitive. Isn't it like, oh, I just need to
Mhm.
find the right therapist, or I need to give them the most persuading, I need to do an intervention, I need to convince them. Like, but instead you
Mhm.
say it's like being, taking care of yourself. Why? Why do you
Mhm.
say that?
Mhm. That's really all we're responsible for. And that's really all that we actually have power over. We're not responsible for anybody else. We're not responsible for anyone else's feelings, anyone else's choices, behaviors, actions, it's like, and that's actually a big way that people give power away, is to think that it's your responsibility to save someone, and it's actually quite, it's counterintuitive, because if you actually want to support someone, the best way you can do that is to allow them space to make their own choice, to make their own decision, to take responsibility for themselves, to be in their power. So if someone's choosing to be an alcoholic, and that actually feels controversial as I say that, but I believe that to be true. I feel like we're always making a choice, consciously or unconsciously. We're always making a choice. And we're not a victim, actually. We're not a victim to our choices, not a victim to, I believe now, like maybe for some of my path, I identified as an alcoholic, as a drug addict, but I'm actually not a victim to drugs or alcohol. I was choosing to play out the experience of, yeah, being a victim to drugs and alcohol. I chose that experience so that I could, be speaking to you now from this other vantage point,
Yeah.
having lived the contrast. And so that's what I mean. The best thing that you can do if you see someone in your life suffering, especially with addiction, and you can go and learn this in recovery programs too. It's the same message. It's like, focus all of the energy that you focus on worrying about the other person, like how much energy are you giving to like worrying about them? And that energy that you're giving to worrying about them, to tracking them, to thinking about how you have to help them, how you have to shift to support them, it's actually empowering them to stay sick, to stay
Yeah.
in the problem, to stay in their
Yeah.
disease.
To keep that
It's like
pattern.
validating. It's enabling.
Yeah.
It's actually enabling them, because probably what they really want is love, is attention, is they feel isolated and alone. So perfect, you're showing up that way. So they're going to keep getting what they want as long as they keep giving the bait,
Yeah.
and that's maybe an oversimplified way to say it. But really, the most empowering thing anybody can do is to like fully direct all of your energy to feeling your best, to taking care of yourself, to getting to know you.
Yeah.
Like, what do you really want? And then you may find, here's the thing, right? Because this is great intimacy to actually like focus your energy on yourself. It's a lot easier to look at someone else and be like, oh, this is what you need to do to be better. You know, turn the table onto you and really get intimate with you. And how are you showing up in life? How do you feel? Do you feel supported? Are you happy? Do you feel like you have what you need? Do you feel confident?
Hmm.
Do you feel fully alive? And get really turned on about, you feeling your best. And you might find in that process that the people that you love, and the people that maybe are around you that you love, but they're suffering, you might find that they either fall out of your life, they might not actually be in alignment with you once you're really like, in your power. You might find that they totally shift because you're actually such a powerful example of, what it's like to take care of yourself. All sorts of things can happen. But I tend to find that the former is more true. Like the people that you thought you really cared about, that you're giving a lot of energy to wanting to help, once you focus your attention on yourself more fully, you actually kind of fall out of resonance with a lot of the people that you once thought you really wanted to save.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful nuance, actually, that until I think one lives, they might not really fully get, they might not be able to experience until you live it, you know? Because the thing that comes up when you say
Mm.
that to me is when somebody is in that destructive pattern, if we're running some kind of like a rescuer pattern of our own or, something like that, that's part of what's keeping their pattern in place. And the moment we stop that and turn our focus inward, like you're saying, that the entire dynamic can shift. But that's interesting. I can also hear how this could be very conceptual, but until somebody
Hmm.
lives it, they
You
won't
got to
really get
feel
it.
it.
Yeah.
And we've all kind of lived it. I mean, we're also talking about codependency versus sovereignty or independence, or
Yeah.
interdependence.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that running rampant. And we're talking about, unconditional love versus dependent love. Dependent love says, I'll love you if, I'll love you when.
Right.
You change, when you get sober, when you get clean. I got to help you do that so we can be in love or whatever it is. Versus unconditional love, like true love, I believe, is I love you right now as you are.
Yeah.
You're perfect, whole, and complete.
Yeah.
And I'm perfect, whole, and complete. And I'm completely committed to, full responsibility for living my best life. And I hold you to that standard too, because that's why we're here.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Okay. So the last question, I want to transition away from maybe what we've been talking about directly just a little bit, because you gave what I thought was a really beautiful distinction in this book about service versus servitude.
Hmm.
And I'd never heard it laid out like that before, but I'm really fascinated by that. And I wonder if, before we move to the enlightening lightning round, if you'd be willing to say a little bit about what you mean by that.
Yeah. Thank you for asking me about that. Hmm. Yeah, there's a distinction between, like what you asked me, the meaning of life, right? It's like to be yourself, to have a great time and help others, to be of service. Being of service is like, feels good. It feels like giving from overflow. We give a gift because we naturally have these beautiful gifts. And of course, we want to share them. It's like the most natural thing ever. And it feels like lightness. It feels like joyful. It's like the definition of abundance, right? Like, oh, I have all this love. I have all this wisdom. I have all these learnings I want to share. You don't even think about it. You just want to help. I feel like all humans are actually really wired to be in service and to help and to give a gift. We each have a really unique key and a gift to give. And we're here on earth in this life to explore and find out what that gift is and then like, give it because there's no better feeling. And then servitude is this experience that I lived a long time playing out and sometimes will still pop up. And it's this feeling of like obligation of like, I have to, I should, I'm supposed to, make a video because I'm supposed to help people. I'm supposed to go and, I have to do the podcast because I have to help all these people wake up. I have to. It's up to me. And there's like pressure and constriction, or there's an energy of people are expecting me to do this. They're expecting me. People are depending on me. So I have to. And there's really this almost enslavement energy of like, like I owe people a debt. I have to show up and perform so that everyone will ascend because it's all up to me.
Yeah.
And, I'm playing with that a little bit, but, this is an energetic that, wow, I've gone through a lot of initiations in, and it's a really helpful discernment tool. And I spoke about it in the context of empaths, but it also came up a lot for me in the context of my business and being a coach and a healer. And this is my path in life, is to be of service in this way as a guide. Like I'm here to be a guide and I am here to wake humanity up, but it's not out of servitude. It's not a have to.
Yeah.
It's not even an obligation. It's a deep desire to live my soul mission. And so it's with great joy that I create. And yet, sometimes the energy of servitude can still creep in if there's any distortion of validation seeking, needing attention, wanting people to praise me as the guru or be on a pedestal. If there's any insecurity at play, then that energy can creep in of, I should make this video because I'm on one level, I'm going to get some attention and I should do it because it's expected to happen once a week, and little things like that. And it can be subtle or it can be very overt. And so I made a little table in my book about how, for a lot of empaths, it's like, that's mind blowing to them. Like, oh my God, as an empath, I grew up my whole life thinking, okay, if I can just help other people feel good, then I can feel good. Since I'm feeling what everyone else is feeling, as long as I can manage everyone's happiness and make sure everyone's feeling okay, then I can feel okay. But that's servitude. That's, again, taking responsibility for everyone else's feelings and energy and feeling like it's all up to you to take care of everyone, so that you can feel good.
Yeah.
Versus flip the whole switch. I'm only responsible for myself. I'm going to commit to taking amazing care of myself. I am the most important person in my life. I love myself. I accept myself. Do your practices every day. Take care of you. Come into mastery over your emotions, your energy. Have fun. Be yourself. And then, how do you want to share your gifts? Oh, your presence just becomes this radiant light that happens to be healing, is naturally uplifting of people that come into your environment. But there's no codependency. There's no conditionality.
Yeah.
There's no like, I have to be responsible for you so that my happiness is contingent upon you.
Yeah.
So, and there's some little checklists that in that table that people tend to really enjoy. They're like, oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Service versus servitude. I've been totally a slave to doing what I think everyone wants me to do.
Hey, thank you for listening to part 1 of my interview with Sydney Campos. Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life isn't working for many people. Whether it's in the developed world, where we're dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, divorce, jobs we hate, relationships that don't work, or people in the developing world who don't have access to clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or who live in conflict zones, there's a lot of people on the planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, I invite you to connect with me at goodliving.com. I've created Life's Best Practices Breakthrough Coaching to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated school, you're going through a divorce, you just got married, you're headed into retirement, you're starting a business, you just lost your job, whatever it is you're facing, I've developed a 36-week course that you go through with me and a community of achievers and seekers who are committed to improving their own lives and the lives of others. So through this online program, you will have the opportunity to go deep into every area of your life, explore life's big questions, create answers for yourself in community, get clarity and accountability. If that's something you're interested to learn about, I invite you to contact me directly at brian@brianmiller.com or by visiting goodliving.com.